kicked off yesterday with a very interesting keynote from Alistair Kroll, telling us that no one else should know more about us than we know about ourselves, which is a really important takeaway. And we also had Eclectic Method that DJ'd for us and showed us some really nice video mashups. And today, and all the lighthouses. And today we're ready to kick off the second day. So my name is Elena Pugia, and I am the CEO and founder of Data Natives, a community of data scientists, more than 80,000 of them around the world that come together to learn, to co-create, and provide opportunities. And I'm also representing actually now officially here BothAndEu, as a co-director, which is a non-profit organization, is a new foundation, and we really want to do some really good things for the society, and to provide as much transparency and privacy. So, and I see Laird also joined me here when I said about BothAndEu. So, an overview of day 2. And this is an initiative by BothAndEu, by the way. So an overview of day 2. So we're kicking things off with Vince Madai, who's going to be the keynote in a little while. And then right afterwards, we are all gathering to the lighthouses. So we're going to have 2 sessions with the lighthouses today. A session in the morning from 9:40 to 10:40, and a session in the afternoon from 4:35 to 5:05. We are also going to have a panel, 2 panels in between, one at 12:35 till 1:15 on data privacy and GDPR, a topic that we revisit regularly because it's so important. I mean, there's the foundations there of the general data protection regulation. However, it's such a new, it's really a new thing. Europe is really leading the conversation there. And from our perspective, we really need to look at it closely and see how we can actually apply it, which is why it's one of our objectives for this summit, and I'll get to that. And we're also revisiting another very interesting topic about open data in healthcare. So how basically can you advance research in healthcare and at the same time protect patients' data? I'm sure Vince would have some thoughts on that too. And as I mentioned, we're starting with Vince Madai's keynote. Then we have Georgia Boolin's keynote in the afternoon. She's the executive director of Simply Secure, and has a lot of thoughts and ideas around security and works with it a lot, which is an important topic for us. And the keynote with Cory Doctorow, who is an exceptional writer. He has published a lot of books, and he can talk about almost anything and do it very eloquently. On that note, maybe Laird would also want to say hello to everybody here.
Yes, good morning, everybody. We're going to have a very exciting day today. I think yesterday was quite a fine way to get started. And I'm just looking through here, and I really can't wait to get going. There's so many great topics, and the keynotes are really going to be exceptional.
Thank you, Laird. Right, so how do we all get started here? Very, very important. Guys, please join the BothAndEu community platform. This is where, as you can see here, we already have some projects there, and you can engage with the solutions for the COVID-19 crisis. And what is important is not only to sign up, but actually to accept the invitation to our summit group. So accept the invitation, Transparency by Design, in order to be able to chat with other participants. So that's a tool where you can meet other people and chat with them. To access all the reading materials. As you know, this is an unusual unconference. So for us, we're really mashing different formats together, and we really want the participants to be active as speakers, as contributors, and we use this as a working group. So read the materials and come with your opinions at the lighthouses. You can then access the transcription from all sessions, so you can see what has already been discussed in previous lighthouses. And of course, you can co-work for future endeavors, because the work doesn't stop where we are. And this is what we're trying here to do. We're trying to do a mini sprint, get to know each other with the other participants, but then continue the work afterwards. So by reading materials, what I mean is we have a list of manifestos which was collected by the BothAndEu team, and you can see we have manifestos specifically around the COVID-19 crisis in healthcare, in privacy policy, in tech, and in civil society. And one of our main objectives is to consolidate all of these materials and to consolidate them by creating one main source, one, let's say, version of one source of truth, let's say, one main data point. So that's one of the things that we're trying to achieve through the lighthouses. And with that note, I think, gave away one of the objectives, which is to consolidate all existing manifestos for COVID-19, to draft a software certification standard for GDPR compliancy. So as I already said in the beginning, we really think that Europe is leading the conversation there, and there's a lot of things happening with the general data regulations. However, whether all of these apps that are coming out are really they're really regulated, or they're really going along with the standards, that's another question. So this is what we want to check, this is what we want to do, and that can be the objective of one of the lighthouses, either the privacy one or the tech one. And of course, technology is not the answer if without actually asking the right question. So that's why we need to reassess and look at all of the technology that exists out there and see how it can be usable for marginalized communities, and not to, it's not one one shoe fits all. So we really take care and be careful about how to apply that. So from the nitty-gritty tech related questions, a question that comes up a lot actually is how to join this session. So it's true, it might appear a little bit complicated, and of course sometimes we have technical issues that are unrelated with the usability of the platform, but the easiest way to get access to the platform is go to the talk that you want to see on the website at the time that you want to see it, and click the broadcast. That would only start 2 minutes before the session. So if you don't see this blue and it's white, then that means that you cannot access it yet. There's nothing wrong with the platform. It just means that it's not available yet. If for whatever reason you receive a 404 code, please reach out to events@economy.com or to the specific stage managers of any of the lighthouses. And on that note, and I'm 2 minutes early, I would like to introduce you to our keynote for the first keynote of the day, with a very provocative title, When Fake is Good News. I'm already very much intrigued to hear about what he has to tell us. He has frequently spoke at our events, and we really like his contributions every time. He's a senior medical AI researcher at Charité. When I asked him to come and speak, he actually told me that they're working right now with synthetic data. So that could be a very interesting coming right from research for us to hear and find out. And he's also the Chief Scientific Officer at AI for Medicine. So without further ado, Vince Madai, thank you so much for joining us, and the floor is yours. I am gonna mute myself and close my video and let you speak.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks a lot for the invitation, Elena. I'm going to start with sharing my screen. And I hope that you can see the correct screen now. Can somebody just tell me that it's the correct screen so that you see only the presentation?
Yeah, we only see the presentation.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about this. This is how every online summit at the moment starts. So thanks a lot again, Elena. So as you already said, you said it's provocative. I think it's basically, I'm happy to talk today about a topic that I think is really still in its infancy, using synthetic data. But I really think it could, this is what I want to mention today, really help us reconciling these seemingly contradictory requirements that we want to use data and we want to actually achieve data privacy at the same time. So as you just mentioned, so yes, I work at Charité as a senior medical AI researcher and a CSO at a spin-off that is providing data analytics. I have a quite diverse background in medicine, in neuroscience, in ethics, and in data science and AI. And so this is another one of the topics, synthetic data, that I would like to address today. I'm going to start by stating a fact, and that is we're in the middle of the so-called fourth industrial revolution. And if you actually looked at what this means, so it started very early, like steam power in 1784, and we kind of evolved since then. And when we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, we really mean everything that is connected by networks, so mostly by the internet, all the Internet of Things, all the devices talking to each other, cyber-physical systems, but very, very importantly, one of the key, started to become one of the key components of this fourth industrial revolution is what we call at the moment with the buzzword artificial intelligence. So in other talks, I talk about this longer. Here, I just want to mention again, just artificial intelligence. So basically what we talk about here when we use the buzzword of AI is machine learning or even deep learning. So these are algorithms which are not explicitly programmed to do something. They learn through data that is provided to them, and especially deep learning, basically systems that are very, 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 very loosely based on how the brain works, have been very, very successful here in the last years. And you're probably all aware of the systems that are already powered by artificial intelligence. So if you think about self-driving cars, autonomous driving, right? Think about self-flying drones that are now tested, or the voice assistants that's become better and better. They should be, but still become better and better. Recommender systems, recommending you the next movie to watch or what to buy. And especially in the area of computer vision, automated analysis of what's in a picture, there have been incredible leaps using artificial intelligence in the last years. Now, all this is absolutely great, but these systems need data. We need lots and lots and lots of data for the current artificial intelligence methods to really work properly. I just would like to give an example. ImageNet, it's a collection of images that researchers can use to develop new artificial intelligence algorithms. And this is a set of 14 million images that are used here. And if we even go further and think about big players, names that pop up, Facebook, Google, Amazon, I think we are all aware of the fact that Facebook is not just a platform where you can upload your last birthday party picture. Facebook is a data company, Google as well, and basically Amazon as well. Their asset is the data they have, and they provide services, but basically data is their currency. So we have this process where we use more and more data. On the other hand, the more we talk about data, we are aware of there are data privacy issues. We hear about data breaches, data privacy is a lot talked about. So we have this, and this is the next topic. We have kind of this challenge of data usage versus data privacy. And I would like to dive into this a little bit more by switching to healthcare and just give a little bit a deep dive into why this is a really big challenge. If you look at healthcare, we have a global problem. And this global problem is that health spending has outpaced economic growth in the last years by a great margin. And what are the reasons for this? The reasons for this are A, that we're getting older and older aging society leads to lots of health problems at later stages in life, and this costs a lot of money. On the other hand, we are developing better and better treatments, and some of these treatments are actually really expensive. So this is now an extreme example, but this is a drug where one dose basically costs 2 million euros or dollars in that case, but still a lot of money. Okay, so this means really that our healthcare systems are not sustainable, how we can't be doing it. And we feel that year by year, we don't have the feeling that we get more care. To be honest, in almost all countries, we have the feeling it's getting tougher to even keep the standard of care that we have for everyone. So almost everyone, and again, I just want to mention it, I can have a talk just about this topic, is artificial intelligence can help here. There's really the possibility that AI in healthcare can actually help us to both reduce costs and also actually improve the standard of care. This is really something that is very intriguing. And as I mentioned before, artificial intelligence needs a lot of data. So let's explore first quickly, do we actually have the data? Very quick primer. So you might be aware in this table until terabyte is something that most people are aware now. Of course, you can increase the amount of data. You can go you can go up to petabyte, exabyte, and so forth. And you don't have to memorize this, of course. I just want to show this because already in 2011, there were, at least in the US, this is the numbers that I can find, 150 exabytes, so a lot of healthcare data. By last year, this increased to 2,314 exabytes, at least that is what was estimated. And the estimation is that this will increase by another 50% each year. So we have not big data, we have huge data in healthcare. The problem is, we have this in theory. In the end, we do not have this data available. And why do most of this data we don't have available? I can say just from our experience, we really work when we apply artificial intelligence in healthcare, mostly on small data, and most groups that I know do too, because although this data is there, we don't have access to it. And the reason for it is data privacy, because this data is heavily protected, and it's rightfully so heavily protected, don't get me wrong. So we have this basically dilemma that we have two goals, which both are good, but they can't really be reconciled. If you just look at healthcare, we want to use all the available data to have better healthcare. If we look outside of healthcare, we want economic growth, we want the development of new tech, we want improved services. So we have all these basically good goals. On the other hand, we have data privacy, which is a good on its own. It's very simple. It's your data. These laws are in place to protect you from abuse of this data, and it simply protects our fundamental rights and freedom because data is part of these fundamental rights and freedom. So what are the current ways how to deal with this? Let's have a quick look at that. So one is informed consent. You're of course all aware of this. We want to use your data. Whoever wants to use it, we simply ask you, and you can say yes, you can use my data. What forms can we find when we just look around? So if we look just at healthcare, clinical trials can be done. You give your informed consent that your data can be used. That is one way to do it. In healthcare, or also in other places, this is something that is often talked about, you can donate your data, right? So that's also another form. And you can also kind of sell your data. Now you might say, I would never do that, or I haven't done that. And I would argue almost every one of us actually has done that in a certain form, because all of us, or the majority of us, are actually using free services. Do you have a Gmail address? Are you using Google? Do you use Facebook, Instagram, / whatever? If you think these are for free, think again. These not are for free. You're just not paying with money. You are paying with your data. You have this agreement that nobody reads. You just scroll down and you say, okay, there you have agreed that the data is used. This was the currency. You basically paid for it. So when we look at this, clinical trials is absolutely great. It's ethically fine. If we think about healthcare, the data that we can collect from these is absolutely not enough. That is provocative. I really like the idea of donating data. It simply, at the moment, doesn't work. There's no infrastructure for it. It's too tough. If you think about the required numbers, it's just simply not enough. And the concept of how it works with what I call data buying, I would argue it's ethically problematic, because most people don't really read what's happening there. There's also like social pressure to be on to use certain services. So this is really not that great. There is a potential solution to this, and that is anonymization. Now, this might sound trivial, but when I, especially also in the healthcare field, talk to people, I realize that many people are not aware that all of our data privacy regulations, they really relate to personal data, so that it's clear that it is your data or my data or somebody else's data. The moment we anonymize, and anonymization really means that we cannot identify the person behind the data, and we cannot identify the person behind the data ever. So it can also never be re-identified in the future. So the moment I have data like this, there's no protection for this data whatsoever. That's fine, because we don't know who it is from who provided this data. So even in healthcare, were I to really anonymize the data set fully, this data set can be published, it can be used, it can be shared. There is really no problem doing that. So now you might ask yourself, what's the problem then? Why don't we just anonymize all the healthcare data and just send it out and use it? Well, the reason is it's not that simple. And I would like to illustrate this with an example. So the University of Chicago Medical Center wanted to do a really nice machine learning project. And who did they go to? To one of the places where the machine learning experts sit. So they started a collaboration with Google. And in this collaboration, they used electronic health records from the University of Chicago Medical Center, from hundreds, thousands of patients who came to the hospital, stayed in the hospital, and they recorded events. All in all, 49 billion, I think, events of all these patients that came. So when they were admitted, when they had certain sicknesses, and they started doing really nice modelings, modeling in-hospital mortality, modeling other outcomes, and they published these results. And that this is from a machine learning and healthcare perspective. This is really nice work. And seemingly everything was done fine, because if you look actually into the paper, you can see, I highlighted it, that the data was de-identified. Now, this is an interesting case, because right now there's actually a lawsuit. Somebody actually sued Google and the University of Chicago because of misuse of the data, because of potential breach of data privacy. Now, why did that happen? It happened because of what you can read after the de-identified. It said, except the dates of service were maintained in the UCM dataset. Now, of course, the dates of service were maintained, because that means I need to, for such a modeling approach, I need to know when a certain event happened. So I need to, of course, keep that event date in the system. The problem now is that we have the hospital and we have the date of the event. And now you collaborate with Google. And of course, Google has all the geolocation data in completely different databases in their own databases. So you have an electronic health record, which is seemingly de-identified, but of course you have their variables like age, which are important, and some others. And now suddenly Google has another database where they have information about their users, including their age, but also information, geolocation, when they were at a certain place. That means also when they were at the University of Chicago Medical Center. So what the people who sue here say is that it's for Google super easy to potentially just combine these two databases and to re-identify who the patients in the electronic healthcare record were. So this should just really show that even if you seemingly anonymize the data set and harmlessly think, okay, I need the event date, and just from this data set I cannot re-identify, just combining it with more information can easily re-identify the patient, or at least potentially re-identify the patient. You get the match, and then boom, it's not anonymous anymore. So we have this problem that we basically in healthcare never give out any data because we can't be sure that it's really anonymous. And if you think about brain imaging, for example, your brain is like a fingerprint. There's no way we can really anonymize this. And it has been shown that by using other brain images that where there was more information, it's then it's relatively easy to find out who that was. So again, a little bit provocative, but I would say anonymization, in the end, it also doesn't really work. So we are basically left with the challenge. We need access to really large amounts of data, but we do not really have practical and ethical ways to do it at the moment, to really get this large amount. We have ways to get data, but it's really tedious and problematic. But I would like to show now that maybe there is a solution for this, and this is synthetic data. Okay, let's start with this. What do these three people have in common? These people pioneered the field of synthetic data. Well, that was actually a big lie. What do these people actually have in common? They have in common that they do not exist. These people are completely generated. I took them from a page. This is the page, thispersondoesnotexist.com. And this is a page, you load it, and every time that you load it, a face of a person generated that, as I said, does not exist. It's really weird because these, the quality of these pictures has reached a point where we look at it, or at least that's how it happens to me. I look at it and it's really hard for me to understand that these people actually do not exist, that it's a random generation done by a deep learning model. And the technology that is used here is called generative adversarial networks, or GANs. And I quickly want to introduce on a very, very high level how this actually works. It's in the end, so let's look on the left side in the lower row, we have something that is called a generator. So this generator is creating first from random input samples, and this is sent to a discriminator, and this discriminator has to decide if that sample is real or not. And on the other hand, the discriminator is also being shown real images, so like the real examples. So let's look at this from a little bit simpler. So let's imagine we would like to teach someone to make fake dollar bills. So it starts from random noise, and in the beginning it's like a 2-year-old trying to paint a dollar note. Of course, the discriminator has no problem saying this is wrong. But every time this is wrong, basically the generator starts to learn. It gets better and better, and in the end, until in the end, what is generated is undistinguishable for the discriminator from a real example. So to phrase it a little differently, the goal of GANs is to learn the underlying distribution of your data, and then we can take random samples from this distribution. And each time we take a random sample of this distribution, it should be basically not different to the data that was inputted. And if we use GANs like this, we can, for example, another face that I just took from the page, which can generate just face of non-existing people. We can take a painting from Monet and we can generate a photo out of it, or do the opposite, take a photo and change it to a painting in the style of Monet. We can gender swap Owen Wilson, or we can really make Gordon Ramsay suddenly very old. Or we can make the Mona Lisa talk and see her face in 3D. So all this is possible once we train the system. I just want to show it that really very different kinds of data can really be modeled or generated by GANs. And of course, if we think about now, basically about data, the idea is that you can use GANs for true anonymization. So we can sample new examples from this underlying distribution, and we don't even have to get rid of any variables. We can keep the age, we can keep the event, we can keep everything, because in the end, for every sampled example, this person, this data set does not exist. It never existed. The underlying data that was used to feed it is not there anymore. Of course, this is hard in the sense that, or still hard, because we also wanted that there's no information loss for AI, for predictive modeling. And this is something that we work about. So we work on, and many other groups in the world also work on. I just want to give us a little example of what we are doing. So on the left, you can see this is brain imaging, where with a focus on vessels. So you can see the white areas, the longer white areas in the brain, those are vessels. And how we usually do this is that we extract patches, so little parts of these images, and label the vessel. So you can see the ground truth, only the vessel parts. And then we trained again to generate fake image label pairs, which you can see on the bottom. And then we trained another AI model to actually to segment, to identify these vessels in the brain. And as you can see, you don't need to know a lot about dice similarity coefficient, just know that 1 is the best and 0 is the worst. So you can see that using the real data, we get a dice coefficient of 0.89. So this is very close to 1. And with the generated data, so the fake data, we already reached 0.82. So this is not yet at the level of the real data, but we're getting close. And even within our own project, we started out on a much lower level and improved with different versions of GANs, and improved to 0.82 and are further improving. And this is not the only use case. For many use cases, the performance is getting better and better. GANs can also be combined, this is just to mention it, with differential privacy. So if people have access to the model, we can even ensure that with very sophisticated techniques, no information can leak from the model or can be extracted from the model. And theoretically, with optimized GANs for the use case, any type of data can be synthesized and made available for modeling. And if you think about why am I so optimistic that this actually will work very soon, and we have basically with this a technology that can really reconcile data usage and data privacy, is you should know that GANs were actually developed in 2014. This is just, you can see here now how within 4 years of using this technology, face generation has improved until 2018. So everything that you see now, how good we can do it, I'm pretty sure that in 4 to 5 years, we can generate much of the data used, for example, in healthcare, using GANs, which in my opinion will really lead to the situation where most of the data that is now really protected and we don't have access to can be modified by GANs and made available for the research community to do modeling and to develop new systems to really help patients. And in other areas, we can do that as well. So this is why I really believe that synthetic data by GANs could be a game changer. And I thank you very much for your attention. And I'm happy to answer questions if that is possible.
Thank you very much, Vince, for your presentation and for introducing the way forward, as you mentioned, to reconcile data usage with data privacy. I don't see any questions here at the Q&A section. Anyone who has any questions right now is the time to ask Vince. If not, then I would ask a question.
Sure.
So so you mentioned that that's something that you currently do at Charité. So what is like what is one of the use cases that you currently have with this? Can you share with us any specific area that you used it for research or for a case, for a patient case?
So basically, it was really the interest. So we have been working on this vessel segmentation use case a lot. And we had the same problem. It took us a really long while to get 2-3 data sets to really work on this. So it was kind of in the sense we had a PhD student, and that's how often how it works in research, who really wanted to work on this topic, and we were thinking about use cases. And then one of the use cases really that popped up was, okay, we have so much trouble with this. Let's work on this area. Can we make it? Can we improve here? And can we really start working on this idea that medical data, especially imaging data, will be available more and can be shared throughout the world? I haven't really mentioned that topic. You know from other of my talks that bias is AI bias is a big topic that I like to address. And really, if you think about systems that at some point need to be used in the clinical system, we need to make sure they're not biased. So in the end, we need data from all over the world. We would need examples from different scanners. We would need examples from different settings, different populations. I really don't see how this would ever be possible without solving this problem of anonymization. How would we otherwise get access to this without sacrificing data privacy, or getting the data from areas without data privacy or reduced data privacy, which again is an ethical problem. We have data privacy, but we have no problem buying data from country X to develop the things where they don't have it. It's also problematic. So,
yeah, absolutely. But I guess it's been a topic for a while. I suppose that's why your title is provocateur like that. So in a way, recreating data, so fake data. It's a good thing. I see there's 2 questions here, so I'm gonna ask them. One is from Eugenio. If we do not know the pattern we are searching on the images, like coronavirus in the lungs, how do you pretend to make synthetic image?
I mean, it's not about pretending. The thing is, the system learns the distribution of the data that you just give it. So even if we don't know what's in the images, it's in the images, right? So of course you have to make sure that it's inside. So maybe I see your question in the maybe I take your question in the sense you should of course you should know what you want to fake, right? So if you're not sure that this is really showing COVID at all, then of course it's harder to do. But in the end, the use case stays the same. So let's assume also your COVID example. Let's assume you have a data set of patients and you want to find the ones that have COVID, and some have it and some don't. If you take that data and you kind of fake it with the GAN, you have the same distribution. You will have information where it's lacking, and sort of images where it's lacking, and images where it's inside. So in the end, you can generate the same distribution that is in your data, so you can use it for the same use case. Again, the messier, of course, your data is that you use, the harder, of course, it is for the GAN. And as I said, this is work in progress, and that's important to me. I'm not saying that this works perfectly already. I'm just very, very optimistic given how incredibly quickly this field has evolved in the last years.
Another question from Stephen Tatum. Do you think that GANs represents the closest thing we have to true or perfect anonymization that there is now? What possibilities are there?
I really think so, because all other possibilities are kind of the classic ways, right? So you try to think about following guidelines, what information you need to take out of the data, and then it turns out that it's even that is not enough. You can almost never guarantee that it's really never re-identifiable. And for images, I mean, what people have been doing, I mean, you have to imagine you image, let's say in medical imaging, the whole head. So people were quite quickly, we can just render the surface and you can see the face. So that's probably a bad thing. So maybe you should so there are automated tools that can, basically cut out of the face of the image. that's already helpful. But as I said, the brain itself, it's kind of like a fingerprint. So how do we deal with that? We can't. So that's why images are basically not shared at all, unless with the consent of patients, and that is very rare.
Thanks, Vince. And one last question before we move. And my calendar just reminded me before we move to the next session. Chad said, "Can you talk about the difference between pseudo-anonymization and the GAN system of anonymization?"
I mean, pseudonymization means that there is, I just give it like different name, but there's a table with which I can basically still kind of look up who that person was. So this is kind of nice for like internal use. We do this a lot in the clinical settings. So we use IDs, for example, but we always know who that ID belongs to. GANs is completely different. The person so the information that is sampled, there is no table. It doesn't belong to anyone. It belongs only to the distribution. So in that sense, these data is it's not even anonymous in the sense because it doesn't belong to anyone that's really existing. That's the nice thing about it. We can call it true anonymization, but in the end, it's even more than that. We didn't have to transform any existing data. It's not even anonymized. It's basically generated.
Great. I'm going to take one last question by Jennifer Baxter. So GAN sounds great, but do you have recommendations for what we can do today to protect our data, specifically our medical data?
Okay, so this is a question of data protection, not data privacy. I mean, I would argue that your medical data is in most cases quite well protected unless you upload it somewhere. So most hospitals have quite, at least in Germany, but I would say in Europe have quite okay systems to really make sure that nobody is hacking inside. So these are usually the places. Maybe your doctor's office could be less secure. I admit that, but then there's nothing really that you can do. You cannot really go there and improve the data security of your doctor's office. So I think the personal what we can do is relatively limited, and this is of course a problem. We just basically have to rely on the data protection systems that are in place. So I think that insurance and hospital data is quite well secured. Most of probably doctor's office data is less well secured. I'm hard pressed to see what we can do except of forcing politicians to act in a certain way through democratic processes. I don't think we can do anything really more than that as a single people. Not sure that answered the question, but I tried.
Definitely tried. No, but it's important to also know that there's hurdles in the system. So thank you so much, Vince Madai, for this talk.
Thanks a lot for the invitation.
Yes, and now can you see my screen? Because I have a note for everybody. Now after this kicking off of this event with Vince Madai talking to us about the options that we have for data privacy and how to still manage to answer the questions of both ends, still manage to have healthcare for all and still have data privacy. Now it's time to take all these learnings from this session and go to the lighthouses. We start there at 9:40. As you all know by now, the room only opens 2 minutes before. So no matter how much time you click on it, it won't change. Yeah, I'm really excited for what else would this day bring and what conversation we'll have. Thanks again, Vince. Thanks everybody for being here, and see you very, very soon.
This is the Transparency by Design Summit Data Privacy and GDPR session. We're just waiting for a few more attendees to join, so please give us just a few more seconds. All right, I think we're probably good to go ahead and start. Hello, welcome. This is the Data Natives session on data privacy and GDPR for the Transparency by Design Summit. My name is Carly Howard. I am the head of legal operations for Fathom. We have a low-code platform for data application orchestration and cloud infrastructure management. So if you are interested in saving time on your Azure development, please check us out at fathom.com. It's FATHYM.com. And I want to welcome you today to this panel. We've got a really great panel of experts on GDPR and data privacy. And just in preparing for this session, we were having a really great conversation. So it's nice to welcome you into that conversation and cover some really pertinent topics in data privacy today. I'd like to start by welcoming our speakers and panelists and let them introduce themselves briefly, and then we will get back to our discussion. So first up, we have Charlotte Garish. She's the founding lawyer at Garish Legal. Maybe you want to introduce yourself, Charlotte, and tell us a little bit about your practice.
Yeah, hi Carly, thanks for the introduction. Yeah, I'm the founding lawyer of Garish Legal, which is a digital law firm based in Paris, specializing in commercial law, but also in data privacy and GDPR. So assisting companies that are not necessarily based within the EU and aren't familiar with the regulation, as well as assisting startups across Europe, particularly with a focus on the UK, France, and the Nordics.
Welcome. Sylvain Jongeris, we met here in Berlin at several blockchain events, so I know that you're an expert in that space, and you founded Tech GDPR. Can you tell us about your company?
Sure, thank you, Carly. So Tech GDPR is a consultancy that is not a law firm, but a consultancy focused at helping technology companies with their GDPR compliance and privacy in general. And as such, we help companies all over the world actually to meet the requirements and to organize in such a way that they get towards a privacy-friendly and GDPR compliant product or service. Based in Berlin, and yeah, as you said, we met at blockchain events, probably because we do quite a bit in the deep tech space in blockchain. I'm also the founder and president of an association, BearChain, that gets the blockchain scene in Berlin together. And we also deal with technologies such as machine learning, AI, IoT, etc. So basically everywhere where it's getting technical.
Well, great. That's the perfect topic for our panel then. Christine Sorensen, welcome. Christine is the founder and director of Global Health Literacy Academy.org.
Yeah, my name is Christine Sorensen. I'm based in Denmark, and I'm the founder of the Global Health Literacy Academy. I don't know why they put the website there, but you can find me now. And I'm also the president of the International Health Literacy Association. And we are, of course, focusing a lot on digital health literacy. So with all the new digital services that are popping up, which mostly is for the advantage of citizens and patients, we also do see some barriers to it, and I'm happy to be on board in the panel today. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Sasha Gardenbach, President and CEO of Via AG. Welcome. Oh, Sasha, I think you're on mute.
Yes, I just realized it.
Welcome.
Thank you for welcoming. So yeah, I said I'm also the founder of Via AG. I also founded a second company. It's the Global Citizen Foundation that actually belongs, both company belongs to it. So, and what we are aiming to do is basically with the foundation to educate the society about the importance and the value of data and also the power of technology, and defining a new rule work that is more practical and on top of GDPR, if you will. And with Via AG, we are building technology that is connecting people and organizations in I would say in a whole new way around personal and private data, and that's helping to basically level up in that discussion and providing possibilities to take advantage of the whole topic on the data privacy discussions. Yeah.
Great, we're happy to have your expertise here today. Thank you. Matthias Reichert, a corporate data strategy for BMW. Welcome to the call today. Please let us know a little bit about what you do in the data privacy space.
Yes, so I researched in my PhD how transparency can be measured quantitatively. And so that's my main question, because it's not enough to just propose we have transparency, but we need to actually get to the user experience side. And so that's my main motivation to be here, also discussing how this can be done on a more global scale.
Great, thank you for bringing that practical perspective to our panel today. And I think the last speaker to introduce would be Chad Wolin, founder of Privacy Experience Agency. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, so I got drawn into all of this because I was so fascinated with the way that the GDPR puts people at the center of its legal framework. As someone who's been working in marketing for 25 years, I've always thought that the customer needs to be central to everything that we're doing. I've been very, very disappointed in the way that the talk is never met by action. And I just felt it's great to see a law where maybe companies are obliged to start listening to their customers, and we can start building the experiences and the services around privacy that the customers deserve.
Well, you know, that is a perfect lead-in to our first question today, which is, let's talk about trust. As I was preparing for our panel today, I noticed that quite a few of you, almost all of you, actually have the word trust prominently displayed on your website, or you mention it in your bio, so it seems really important. Chad, maybe you can start us off talking about how trust and data privacy relate.
Okay, well, I mean, firstly, trust is one of the major goals of the GDPR and the single digital market. So we can't escape talking about trust in the law, but actually I think there's a couple of steps back about when we think about trust. I prefer to think about trustworthiness and how we help people see institutions as being trustworthy. And I think that starts by understanding that where trust comes from, and trust comes from people understanding the motivations behind businesses wanting their information. What is in it for them, and why are they doing this? And am I going to be treated fairly? And that's about what we consider really important, which is this idea of respect and respectful engagement with data subjects around their data. And then also, more tangibly, do they actually have the capability to deliver on those motivations? And that doesn't just mean do they do the great AI work, but actually the capability to deliver on the exercise and fulfillment of their rights under the GDPR. So it's a full package. It's not just the end product, but it's also the whole end-to-end about understanding how you put together a full privacy experience. And trust is an outcome of those things. And one needs to break it down a bit first. So understanding motivations and building capabilities and communicating those things clearly. And trustworthiness.
Trustworthiness. So building on this concept, what does ethical data research look like? That seems like a really important element of trust. Does anyone want to comment on that?
I think, let me start, and also coming back to what Chad just said, if you look at a topic and if you look where the trust is when it comes to data, I think we had a couple of events where we can say that trust itself was debated. So we have seen like bad actors, which made it quite popular to the media. Obviously with the most leading one, Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, don't need to say that here. But we have also seen a lot of data breaches where people got affected. And then obviously lately there was a big data privacy debate when the first technologies came onto the table to solve the issue of Corona and to understand the virus better. I think there was a good debate, or triggered a good debate about data privacy. And if you look like what data privacy really means in the information age, and I think that is important, and that's also a bit distincting from of GDPR. I think data privacy in the information age is really about choice. It's about freedom, that you give to the user who owns the data mainly. So the one having the choice, like who to share the data with, or with whom, and to what level of detail you're sharing the data with, and also understanding how data might be used and getting all the transparency in that one. And if you think of an ethical data research, the main challenge from the researcher is that they need data, like when you look at the data research, and they have to have it. And I would say quite easily it is when the personal data is researched with explicit consent by the user, or shared with explicit content by the user. So that means giving control over your data, providing the full transparency over your data, make it clear and simple, as Chester said. I like that statement a lot. And having the user being in that position where he can decide if he feels comfortable, like the data is going to be used, and putting them in the driver's seat. Yeah, that's my first thought here.
Challenge, of course, is one challenge here, of course, is that you don't know always in advance which kind of combination of data you would need. And especially if you are in the data science sphere, where the combination of different sources of data is what you actually want to get new insights, to get new products and solutions. That's something where you don't know in advance what the purpose will be. And so this difference between knowing what the goal is in the end and knowing what you want to research in the beginning is quite a challenging one to communicate to the end users.
Yeah, I think that comes down to, like, one of the key principles of the GDPR is accountability. So it's ensuring that the companies that are responsible for processing personal data of individuals are actually accountable and are able to stand behind their decisions. So it's really interesting what you said about clearly defining the purpose initially. So there's obviously the concept of data minimization under the GDPR, where you really only need to collect what is necessary for achieving the goal. Likewise, we were talking earlier about the different apps for tracking and tracing for the current pandemic. What is the actual data that's required from users of those apps in order to achieve the goal? And I think it goes to say that GDPR compliance is not something that's fixed and occurs on one specific date. It's actually an ongoing collaboration, and that's something that I see quite often with my clients too. And I think that once, startups or even larger companies that are dealing with personal data or are working in the new technologies field kind of get behind that and have kind of privacy culture as a really big key element through the entire organization, then we can start to talk about trustworthiness, because I think responsibility, accountability, and trustworthiness kind of all go hand in hand. And I think one of the biggest difficulties that we have at the moment is that the law does not always keep up with new technologies. New technologies are developing so fast. And I think we might talk about this later with blockchain. There's a very much concept of the black box effect, where a user can input their data, they have no idea how it's being processed. Quite often I see negotiations and discussions about the tech company wanting to retain that data for machine learning and AI development. But then there's a big issue there because it's containing personal data. So again, it comes down to what we need and what the purpose is. Can we use other techniques in the GDPR, like anonymization of data, for example, so you can't actually identify any individual user, aggregate it, pseudonymize it ultimately. So there's lots of different techniques, I think, within the GDPR, which are kind of general application. I think one of the difficulties is when we are coming to look at new technologies or something specific, like a pandemic right now, or questions of, discrimination or difficulties for minorities, is kind of how we can work together to apply the GDPR in a practical sense as practitioners, as developers, as founders, and also as supervisory authorities in charge of kind of dealing with these issues. Should we be looking at implementing certification schemes? That's allowed under the GDPR. There are basically none to my knowledge right now. Similarly, like codes of conduct, which can kind of provide overall general guidance, which can make companies that are processing data in innovative ways more accountable and therefore seeming more trustworthy to the end users.
Let's build on this idea of how technology can actually assist with data privacy and coordinate with the GDPR. Sylvan, can we go to you to talk about what you see in the deep tech space as far as the intersection with data privacy?
Sure, and I think what you mentioned is actually very interesting, right? So many people, especially if we look at blockchain, see a lot of problems. Blockchain is immutable, yet under the GDPR, there's the concept of the right to be forgotten, where basically the data subject has the right to request their deletion of data in certain circumstances. And for example, the public element of many blockchains, right? So that we share the information all around all the participants is just doesn't make it a great place to store personal information. However, there are certain things that there are certain blockchain is not one technology; it's a broad range of technologies that can be used, and it can also be used in a way to aid GDPR compliance. For example, certain elements of the GDPR require registries to be kept, and that is something where a blockchain can offer a immutable registry or a history of events that can also aid with data privacy. Just as one example in the blockchain space, perhaps.
Thank you for giving us some insight on that. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I mean, it's very, very easy to talk about technology, because that's kind of what interests us all, and the law, because after all, the GDPR is a law. But where are people in all of this? And the GDPR provides a lot of different points where we need to be asking, before we think about the technology and before we think about the law, what are people thinking about this? And Charlotte's point about accountability is a really critical one, because it's often really important just to ask ourselves, accountable to whom, right? And quite often we say our boards or our management or the regulator, but we miss out the data subject. And once we start focusing in on the fact that the accountability structures that we need to put in place are to let people hold us to account, then it might be that some of the ways we approach ethics and the law and fairness and transparency become slightly more focused, and slightly kind of, because we have a definite audience and thought in mind, which is, this is all about the data subject. It's about their rights, their empowerment, and their protection. And we need to be thinking about that. And to be honest, technology, starting with technology, in my experience, is often a way to write users out of the equation. We know from experience that users and technology is often it's a struggle. So the law and users, it's a struggle. So we need to oversteer to put users in the driving seat.
I think in that regard, it's just for me, GDPR is a box to tick. You know, on the website, there is a question, you tick the box and you can move on to the website you wanted to see, or the service you wanted to see. And I think most people on the street would not know what's behind those 4 letters. We haven't done enough, or either it's presented as a barrier because there are all these, it's a legal term, and people just don't know what it covers. Only us, let's say, the experts. So there's a huge job to ensure that people know what it is, understand it fully, and can evaluate whether they say yes or no to share their data, and to understand what it's being used for. So I don't know whose responsibility it is, perhaps both the citizens and, let's say, the services, the systems, the regulators, as was mentioned before. But at this point in time, I fully agree that we haven't done the job of having it user-centered.
Not wanting to be too much of a Zoom hog, but I always start by kind of grounding that thought about users and education and their engagement with privacy by starting by thinking, well, hold on a second. If we were talking about health and say diabetes, which is out of control, and the amount of effort that goes into trying to get people to think about how they engage with the life and death decisions that they're making about their diet and their exercise, we know that's really hard work. When we think about financial services and trying to get people to save for their futures or not be indebted, we know that's really hard work. Getting people to engage with these really difficult topics is hard. So focusing on motivating them might not be the right way. The other side of the coin is to make it really easy to engage. And I don't think we spend enough time thinking about how we just make this easier for people, because it's going to be really hard if we take health and finance as a benchmark to get them to care or be motivated or to behave in a way that we all desire. Actually, it's all about ease, and it's about focusing in on that. That's what I would say.
Building on that, perhaps, what I see as well is that users or data subjects are very often given a choice between convenience and privacy, right? And what I see around me is that many of the people that I interact with and in general around me is that the choice is more often for convenience. I download this app to have a more convenient experience, but therefore give up a little bit of our privacy. So our privacy has basically been bought off by this convenience that we can get through apps and services.
But consent must be as
Free
easy
apps at that. Yeah. Matthias, I see you nodding your head, so I just wanted to check in and see if there's something you wanted to add to the conversation before we move to COVID. We've got to talk about that today.
So definitely, it's extremely important to differentiate between the notion of openness and the notion of transparency. So what we see people using as transparency in public debates is more openness. It's just publishing information or being open source is a very important step, but it's not making sure that the user actually is able to understand it. And this whole discussion about being able to access the information and understand information is what really differentiates transparency from this more general broad term of openness. So if we look at the research, we know we have a very strict definition of what transparency really is. We have measuring models to do that. We know that we can assess whether users perceive that really as transparent. Can they understand what they really are being told, what's been happening? And we also have studies that show us that it can be increased by interfaces around 20–30%, depending on the case. So for data protection menus, for everything, every contact point to the end customer, you should really care about getting this contact, this user experience in a quantitative way and incorporate that evaluation into a formal process into your interfaces so that it gets a critical, important part of your development process. And the second step from transparency is the trust. It's highly correlated. We have studies for that too. We know the trust and transparency are correlated. And we also know that the acceptance and the buying behavior is influenced by that. So if we want to have this level of influence, if we want to have people accepting what is being in the software, we need to systematically evaluate it and in the process of designing, bring these insights into the process. And speaking from practice, that is quite hard to do because especially traditional companies are more on the engineering side and more on the mechanical, physical world, and telling them to take a concept like trust or a concept like transparency on a quantitative level inside of your consideration chain is quite a challenge. But it's quite possible to go there. And also for the efforts in COVID, I didn't see it happening right now. I didn't see user studies asking for perceived transparency. And in the official statements, you just hear we are open source, we are transparent.
I'd like to emphasize how important that is, that difference between openness and transparency. And there's been a lot of work done in the sphere of architecture when it comes to government buildings and parliaments about the difference between turning brick walls into glass ones and actually designing and creating buildings that help citizens understand the processes that go on in those buildings. And those are two very, very different things, as Matthias has said. And quite often all we're doing is just replacing bricks with windows. And that doesn't really help data subjects at all. And again, it's why we need to kind of move on and also start to explore the diversity of opinions and attitudes and behaviors that citizens and data subjects exhibit, and how we build our experiences of privacy for them that take into account those very, very diverse places they're coming from.
To me, it comes down to the language. I hear now data, the term data subjects. I would never, ever recommend our students to use that word because people are not subjects. They're people or participants in a study or participants in, we do it for them, with them. So that's just a reminder that we have actually, from our education in public health, tried to eliminate the word subjects.
I suppose I use it in a way that maybe in health we talk about a patient.
Yeah, or patients, citizens, people, yeah, men, women, children, whoever, but not data subjects, because that's a technical term, and it could be anything.
Yeah,
tables or toothbrushes.
Charlotte, I think you had a comment, and I also wanted to thank you for answering the live question. For all of the viewers, there was a live question: how might Brexit affect the future of data privacy law? And Charlotte has put in an answer for that you can check, but I think you wanted to add a comment as well.
I think it's just really important, actually, like all of the points you've raised are really, really valid. I think it's almost unfair to put the onus of understanding data privacy and data privacy rights on individuals, because most people don't care about these issues. They don't really understand that they're important. Like we were saying, it's not a question of negotiation when you're downloading an app. You may have to give free consent, but it's like you give your consent or you don't use the app. And that's one thing that's prohibited under the GDPR. You can't refuse access to a service because a user hasn't given consent. But then in a realistic world, that's really hard to manage. And I think it's really important what you're saying. It's about the language that's used. I think obviously the GDPR talks about privacy by design, and I think there's huge merit. People have always said, okay, in that case, you need to have a lawyer on board. Yeah, you need to have someone that understands the tech, and you're going to build it around that. But I think one of the huge points that's been missing, and one of the really key roles in this process, and something that, you know, I also see with some clients, is getting a UX designer on board, and someone who is actually specialized in this and understanding user flows, understanding what's accessible, what's understandable. You know, one thing to give a customer preferences portal. We were talking about marketing data earlier, about being able to opt in and opt out, and which type of newsletters you do or don't want to subscribe to. You know, sometimes you have to respond to an email to opt out. Sometimes you're given actual access to some kind of preferences portal. But if that's not done in a user-friendly way, and what this actually means, I think then we hit a huge stumbling block. It may be possible to tick box compliance with the GDPR, but it's really an ongoing thing. Like we were saying, you know, a user, especially when dealing with something related to health, they're obviously very anxious about the issues that they may be facing in any case. So I think kind of having this overall collaboration with a kind of group of experts that really understand the sector, understand the technology, understand the law, but also understand what individual users need from a design purpose, to ensure that the boxes are not just ticked, but actually being adhered to.
There's a lot of language, just to build on what Charlotte's saying. I mean, there's a lot of language we use, and it comes out a lot out of the Commission actually around toolboxes and tools that people can have. And actually, I tend to think it's better to talk about services that people can utilize rather than tools, because you have to learn how to use a tool. You have to become and to understand how that's going to work. If one starts to think about this from a service perspective, then it's about the fact that I want an end result, and I go somewhere and I get it. I get to access my data, the service for the right to access, the service for the right to rectification, not a set of tools I have to learn how to use, but as services that enable and empower me to get to where I want to go. And I think that's also where we need to be starting to think. And again, in the GDPR, the words are there: facilitation. Data controllers have to facilitate data. Apologies for using data subjects, but people.
It's kind of like the issues we were talking about just before the session began, you know, in respect of the kind of myriad of apps that are out there. Like we talked about interoperability from a technical perspective. And, you know, if we're going to be having international travel, in theory, different government-based apps would need to speak to each other so that we can actually track the spread of the virus, if that's the point of these apps, you know, to have any sort of meaningful effect. But I think it's really interesting what we've just been talking about also the user experience of that. For example, to take like an app that most people have is Uber. You can download your Uber app in your home country. For example, if I'm in Paris, then I come to London for the day, and then I can use exactly the same app and achieve the services. I've learned how to use the app. I understand it. I might not exactly understand how my data is being used, or if they're keeping track of my trips for any other reason. You know, I'm a privacy lawyer, but I can't manage to read every privacy policy all the time. But I think there's something about that with a user feeling really comfortable with how the app is working. And I guess we're going to maybe discuss a bit about the different apps, and obviously COVID is the topic that even if it's difficult because we're hearing a lot about it, but it's still really important. But I think there's something in that to ensure that even if we're having different providers, the potential Apple-Google collaboration, if you're in France or Denmark or Germany or Austria, you've also got a different app again. Like, how can we work with that to ensure that data privacy is respected, but also to ensure that there is transparency in the overall process, and how it can be most effective?
So we've been slowly making our way toward talking about COVID, and we've got about 10 minutes left, so let's do that. I would appreciate Christine starting us off, since you're in the healthcare industry. How are you seeing COVID affecting thoughts around data privacy and GDPR?
I have seen it developing, as everyone else, very quickly in the last 4 months here since it hit Europe. And in the beginning, we were all keen to learn about it because we didn't know about the disease, and we're actually still building the plane while flying. And here, all our new apps are there to help us. And I did hear most people would actually like to share and contribute to science. But suddenly all normal science collecting regulations were suspended due to the urgency. And that is where I think we need to really consider, also in times of emergencies, how do we protect the data and the privacy of the citizens on one hand, and on the other hand, really lean on people's help and willingness to share data. And that goes also for many diseases. Most people are really, if they know and it's transparent what the data are used for, many people are willing to share. So how do we get that balance?
We were talking earlier about apps that are being developed for COVID, and Sasha, you were telling us about something you had been working on. Maybe you'd like to share some information about that.
Yeah, more than happy to do so. So the company VIAS was a co-founder of the initiative Healthy Together, which has been launched out of Germany when the Corona crisis started, and so with the aim to group up all the startups of the digital industry in Germany, and basically building a solution that is on one hand helping people, but also like getting back trust into the economy, and obviously like stimulating the economy again. Like that was like one of the first motivations, because like the startups has been the most affected of the crisis as well in the industry. So we were developing the application, and obviously we were co-developing it with SAP and Telekom for Germany. And what I can share is like there was a lot of learning in it. So obviously what the discussion before was about trust. How do you create trust? Like starting from scratch. How do you build trust on scale? So obviously there is like different user groups starting at the age of 16 until the age of like 90 plus, obviously with the most risk groups. So, and what I've seen how to build trust, and there was no time to have a debate how the data should flow and then building the technology. I think it all came together, and it was just showing that actually is working very well together, and also the way how to build trust, the way you communicate, the way you're designing the underlying technology that people actually trusting and also using in that way. And there were good learnings of what was not quite successful. We have seen examples in Korea and Taiwan, Singapore. They have been not truly successful. Israel was very pragmatic with their approach. That was also shaping the discussion, like what is the apps and the technology being used in Europe. We have also seen the limits of GDPR. I think in the beginning of the Corona crisis, like GDPR was a kind of like deactivated, or some areas has been deactivated, if I'm using the right word. And then later in April, May, there was a new rule book being brought out by the European Union, how this technology must look like. However, what it was in a summary, I think the reactions and also the understanding where the limits of current regulation was quite dynamic and quite agile, of like adopting to the true need, and also then seeing the importance of communications, getting trust into the heads of people, having an adoption council that is helping to think in the different user groups that such a technology might face, and also proving and saying that basically the data that's been shared at some point, and that's the case if you're positive, then you have this key information that's been stored on the server, is safe, and having this full transparency. And was all come together. I think open source was one step to it, like the way you communicate was one step to it. The protocol that has been used, which is DP3T now, is the most dominant in Europe. There's still some exceptions in the UK or France that has been used, and that was like creating trust because it was coming out of academia. And then still, I think Apple and Google did quite a fair job of explaining like that they are just making sure devices can talk and operate to each other. And I think overall, I think it was a good way where you see how these things come together. And obviously, coming back to Christine's point, where you have technology that might not be the experts in healthcare. Then you have healthcare, they're not the experts in communication. You have the communication that's not the experts in both. So, but you have to bring together the teams, and you see like it's quite a complex setup if you want to reach trust at multiple levels. Yeah, I think that was like one of the biggest key takeaways from my side, learning like what is truly required of being successful, of driving adoption, which is so crucial in that space, and also creating a picture that allows people to understand what data and information are. Yeah, because very abstract.
Does anyone think that GDPR needs to be adapted to some things that we're seeing because of COVID? Has it brought to light any issues that might need to be changed?
I think just taking this a bit from a lawyer's perspective, I think that the point of the GDPR is that the kind of COVID pandemic hasn't necessarily brought up any issues that we weren't already aware of. I think for the last 2 years, a lot of issues have been raised. For example, how can we best use new technologies? How can we handle sensitive data, which is, for example, relating to ethnic origins, or in this specific context, health data. I think that there's quite a lot of onus that's actually put on the supervisory authorities when it comes to enforcement. I think there's also a lot of onus on practitioners and how the GDPR is actually being applied in practice. As I mentioned, like at the very beginning, the GDPR in itself, in my mind, is quite a generic and quite general. Technology and also social circumstances are developing much faster. I think obviously making a change to the privacy law, the GDPR at an EU level, is going to be impossible and take so much time. And by the time that actually comes through to be enacted legislation and then transposed nationally, the playing field will have already changed again. So I think like it comes down to supervisory authorities taking a kind of collaborative approach. They are there to enforce, but they're also there to oversee. So I think the ICO said that they would have to ensure that regulators apply their authority, taking into account the various situation in the context. And I think it comes down to being able to develop and collaborate together with various certification schemes, again, coming back to trust, and also codes of conduct, so that we can have some kind of harmonized gold standard. Obviously, I think the issue with the coronavirus, not just privacy issues, but generally is the speed at which this took hold. Having companies try to develop apps and take all of these, this new situation and the specific context into account is really hard work. I think in some ways it's amazing that we've managed to have apps that's already been downloaded by so many users, for example, in Germany and so on. And I think governments have really tried to take privacy, forward. I don't know from my perspective that changing the GDPR at this stage is really the right way to go. I think it's more about how it's being used practically and how, various industries can kind of lobby to have specific certification schemes that make sense in respect of the data that they're processing and the technologies that they're developing. I think that flexibility is probably the best way forward at this point, at least.
So from that perspective, I think we can also say that the methods and instruments that the GDPR provides for or allows are not fully used at the moment, right? And especially when it comes down to these specific circumstances, we can look at that much stronger.
I mean, again, just to build on what Charlotte was saying, if you take it frightens me to think of the process involved in after 10 years of getting from public consultation to enactment, the GDPR, the idea that we're restless for it to do that again. And maybe that's where ethics comes in, because I'm normally quite skeptical about ethics, because I feel like our law in the GDPR incorporates much of what over the last 20 or 30 years are the norms of ethics around data protection. We need to focus on how they've incorporated those models and think about how we move beyond them and develop a new ethics. So maybe what we should be focusing on is not changing the law, because the law is rich and we've hardly explored what it really does. But where we do identify gaps, that's where we start thinking, well, this is about our own conformity to a set of standards and norms that sit beyond that, rather than saying we should change the law. But my instinct is the law's got what we need. It's got what we need. It's and we should be focusing on how to enact it, to bring it forward, because we've just touched the surface, really.
We are wrapping up in less than a minute, but I want to allow anyone any last comments before our session ends.
Maybe I start. I'll just say that these inspirational talks, I think, really reminds me how we need to also humanize the technologies and the legal aspects, and not forget that the human is in the center of what we work with. Thanks.
I think from my perspective, it's also important that we realize that where we used to give up our privacy for convenience, we're now doing it for safety, and we should keep realizing that as well.
I would add up on that. This trade-off between having actual impact with data and being able to enforce individual privacy is a very hard trade-off to make, but it's a discussion we have to enter as a society, and we're on a, let's say, a good compromise way in Europe with that.
I think like my closing remark is just looking at the panel today, and it's all about collaboration. It's about having people from different backgrounds with different experiences and different skill sets working together. I think there's like a question on the Q&A really briefly talking about the advice for labeling guides and certification schemes. I think obviously we don't have much time to go into that, but like the key point there is collaboration and making sure that all relevant skill sets and stakeholders, including data subjects themselves, are consulted.
On that note, I would like to wrap things up since we're a couple minutes over, but I know we could continue talking about this for hours. It's been so wonderful to have so much expertise here. I want to thank Data Natives for putting together this panel, and of course, our esteemed panelists. And most importantly, I want to thank the participants of the conference and our viewers. I'm Carly Howard with Fathom, and I look forward to our next session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.